Hello, everybody, and welcome back to You Exchange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hey, what's up? Welcome back. So, in this episode, I'm gonna address a question that I'm oftentimes being asked. And I know a lot of you might say, we can get the answer with a simple research on Google. And this is true. However, I'm being asked this question so often that I think it's maybe more complicated than that. And so I thought about making an episode out of that. It's basically if you do research or any kind of customer slash user facing activity involving gathering insights, so it's not necessarily in research. It can be that you want to learn more about a process, which in itself arguably is research. But anyway, the question is, to how many people should I talk, basically? And so this is a very central question in user experience, in product design, in innovation. And it's so central, and to me, it's really mind-boggling to see that so many people are kind of lost with that, or experience some problems with that, or completely ignore the fact as well. And it's very essential. So I don't want to go back to the roots of why we speak to users, and also basically talking about the different mindsets that we have depending on the type of research we do, and what research is more appropriate for which kind of circumstance or need. For that, I encourage you to listen to other episodes I have. Probably you can find the answer there. But I want to go back to the basics here, and probably this will be understandable to everybody. I don't want to make this too technical, although at some point it might be, because we cannot avoid it. So I will not be technical in this episode, but just know that this is a real, let's say, question that you might ask yourself. Anyway, so imagine that you want to learn about, I don't know, self-driving cars. How does that work? What will you do? You can look into some papers and you can talk to some people. Okay. And the question is, for how long? How much is too much? And how little is too little? And so just think about it this way, to make it as simple as possible, and also to take away a lot of the second guesses and doubts you might have in your head. We are all confronted every day with 1,000 questions about how we must do our job. At least when you're a researcher, and probably when you're a designer, programmer, we are bombarded with questions every day. It's like, okay, I should do this. Should I? And then what is the best way to do it, and why? How can I do it better? And so on and so forth. What does better mean? And so on. Okay. So for some of these questions, I think we can optimize our mindset and way of answering them. So, you might already have heard that this is a science to choose the right number of participants. It is because statistically, a an insight things acquire meaning at a certain number of, sorry, this is not the right way to put it, but you can conclude, for instance, statistically and significantly from a certain number of participants up, let's say. So this is when you want to do statistics. And so there are laws to help you define to what extent can you conclude this and that it's not due to chance. Okay, this is a scenario for statistics, but then we can imagine, okay, if I talk to two people, how can I generalize what I just found? And that's the thing. It can be very scientific, and it is, but it can be very complex when you dig the rabbit hole, let's say. So the goal in this episode is to make it simple. Okay. Again, if we want to understand how do self-driving cars work, what can we do? We can look for some articles and we can ask some people questions. We can watch some videos and we can hear about some podcasts. Not this one. I'm not going to teach you how this works. I don't know. So, the question is, when do you think you learned enough about the topic? And this is something you should define beforehand. And here, I'm purposefully not talking about numbers, because it's not about numbers. It's about a mindset. The mindset is, what is the time I have? What amount of research can I dedicate to it? Am I satisfied with this? And if I'm not, am I satisfied with the fact that I'm not am I satisfied with the uncertainty? Or do I need more? Do I need to extend the timelines and so on? So, as you can see, there is a lot to it. My point being, with any type of research we have, when we use a resource to learn more about something, and here I mean by these resources can be a paper, can be a video, can be a human, the rationale I always adopt is, until I got to a point in which I'm not learning anything new, I go on. So, okay, you might tell me, and you would be right, but this could go on forever because we can learn things forever. Yeah. And you would be perfectly right to say that to me. Now, let's place ourselves in a context, because everything is context. If you're working at a company with tight deadlines and you need to release a product in 4 months and you know nothing about your market audience, it's not the same thing as if you should launch a product in 2 years and you know a lot about your customers. So that's the thing. Everything is context. What amount of research can you afford? And then, all things considered, for the same circumstances, exactly the same circumstances, with the same methodology and the same need, yeah, there are rules you should follow. For instance, I'm going to say them because it's very difficult not to say them. For instance, if you do some interviews with people and you want to gather some insights, it will depend on the discipline. So if you do psychology, we would expect a certain number of participants to be able to conclude, not having people telling us, oh, you did that with too few participants. And if I recall correctly, it would be something like, maybe I'm wrong, just check the facts, but maybe something like between 6 and 15, something like this. I'm actually not sure. But this is psychology. I remember when I did my master thesis in physiology, so it's about measuring physiological signals like heart rate, breathing rate. I measured emotional states, and so on and so forth. This, we expected at least 30 participants. And it's also a good number because 30 participants is the number at which statistical distributions start to emerge naturally. And so it's way easier for us to do some statistics on this. Anyway, so this is another thing. But if you do some, let's say, survey, quantitative user experience research, then we would expect, of course, 100 participants minimum. Why 100? I was told back then by a professor, and I tend to trust my professors on that, but let me know if you have other sources, that we choose 100 participants because, again, 30 is the magical number at which statistical laws tend to emerge and be more accurate, let's say, in a way. And so it's easier for us to make statistics. So would you say, you would tell me, okay, you said 30, but it's 100. Yes, because it's 30 per group of participants. And if I'm not wrong, the number 100 was defined because when you don't know what kind of groups of customers you will have in your participants pool, you go the safe route thinking I might have 3 and I take 10 more as a safe buffer, let's say, just in case, margin. And so that is one way to see it. But if you do some marketing campaigns or analytics, the numbers go way up. It counts in thousands. So that's the thing. It depends on what you want to get out of it. And for someone who never did some research and for whom what I'm saying is Chinese, well, just have in mind the general rule of when you want to discover new things, when you don't know what's happening, when you don't know what you should be focusing on. Imagine you want to release a new product, you want to start a company, you need to innovate, but you don't know what problem you should be tackling. So in this case, you should talk to people. So lack of ideas come oftentimes from lack of matter, lack of substantial matter. So you need matter, you need something tangible to cling on, basically. And so for that, you would interview people. And here, of course, the rule is as long as you're learning anything new, you shouldn't stop. Usually, this stops at around 8 to 12 participants. And this is called a saturation number. Saturation occurs when, for instance, let's say you interview Paul, who is participant number 5, and then you interview Mary, who's participant number 6, and when you speak with Mary, you realize you're not learning anything new. And then you talk to Kevin, and you're not learning anything new either. And so you're like, okay, what's happening? There's a pattern here. I'm really wasting my time. And you shouldn't be. Like with anything else, time is precious. And so that's the rule. When you hear a certain number of participants at which you're not learning anything new, this is called saturation. And when you should plot this, you would have a curve for which you would have in the y-axis you have what you learned, and in the x-axis you have the number of participants. So we can imagine that if this curve gets constant, flat, it's not good. So we stop the interviews. So you can determine the number ahead of time. You can say, yeah, I want between 8 and 12 participants. But be careful, I would say, because maybe from 6 to 8, you're not learning anything new. You would tell me, yeah, difficult to predict, but still, like, don't get too caught up on the numbers. That's the point. Because sometimes, if you do 2 participants and these 2 participants tell you the same thing, and the third tell you the same thing, I would tell you stop. You would tell me, yeah, probably you could have 3 participants telling the same and 3 others telling different things. Yeah, but this is another problem. This is something you should have scoped before, you would have interviewed two different personas, two different kinds of customers. But if you're interviewing one set of customer, one type of participant, and you are always getting the same answers, you already reached saturation. You're not learning anything new. We do research because we want to learn something. If you're not learning anything, you're just wasting your time. And so that's the point. It's very simple to conceptualize it this way. And that's why Jacob Nielsen, in some of his articles, recommends the number of 5 for the optimal number of participants for, and here I want to emphasize, for a certain kind of studies, which is usability studies. This is when you observe someone using a product and you observe, you take notes, you ask questions, and so on. And he said, and I think it was proven by some research, that 5 is perfectly fine for usability studies because it captures 80% or more of the issues you should address when testing your product. So that's one thing. It depends on the method, it depends on the context, but let's say when you go fishing for insights, just the rule is like, am I learning anything new? No, okay, let's stop it, and that's it. This is as simple as that. So you should get a sense of that. Don't go, like, don't waste your time thinking, should I interview 6 or 7 or 8 or 12 or 10? It doesn't matter, really. So that's the point here. Then, if you do quantitative, yes, here this is defined statistically. In here, this is very easy. You have statistical rules to help you define that. So I'm a bit rusty on my statistical knowledge, but I will try to communicate it as much as I can. So basically, when you do statistics, the whole world of statistics is about numbers and is about helping you coming up with conclusions, having probabilities in mind. What is probability? It's, let's say, the rate at which you would conclude or observe a behavior and conclude about something, knowing that you could be wrong, for instance, or the chance at which you could observe a phenomenon. Okay, if I say I could observe this moon of this planet in the sky X times a year, well, you could divide the number of days you could observe it, number of nights you could observe it, by the number of nights in the whole year, and you would have a probability to observe it. And so this is the rate at which an event would occur. So the number of times an event would occur relative to the total number of times you would measure. You would take some measurements, if that makes sense. And so we can do probabilities about pretty much anything. So you can say, okay, what is the percentage I have that my child would be XYZ color of hairs, for instance. And probability is really much used in genetics, for instance. Anyways, probabilities are defined by laws, and you have ways to compute them. It's mathematics in a way, and so this is useful when you are involved with numbers, and so when you do quantitative analysis for user experience research. So it works more or less this way. If you do a test, you do a test with a hypothesis in mind, basically. And usually this hypothesis is called the null hypothesis, which is, okay, imagine I'm drinking 3 cups of coffee a day, and I'm pertaining to group A, drinking 3 cups of coffee a day. and I want to compare that to group B drinking 6 cups of coffee a day. Don't do that, please. But that's just for the sake of the example. And then we will compare their exam results at the end of 1 month. Okay. And so, what is the null hypothesis here? What is the hypothesis? All of that is linked to, again, your research plan, why you're doing this research, what do you expect to get out of this research, what do you want to understand, and so on and so forth. But here, anyone from outside the research could understand that what you're testing is if coffee impacts performances, cognitive performances. And so what we would do is the null hypothesis is always phrased more or less the same way. It's always the fact that your intervention is not impacting anything. So the null hypothesis here is group A has the same cognitive performances than group B 1 month after on the day of the exam, basically. So basically the null hypothesis would say coffee has no impact on cognitive abilities. And then that's the null hypothesis. And then you have an alternative hypothesis, which is the opposite, which is, coffee does impact cognitive performances. And so you would do a test with a high enough number of participants to compare. You would compare, for instance, their exam scores one to the other. We could get into the nitty-gritty of the experience and experiment design to say maybe this is a badly designed experiment. I would agree with you, but that's not the point here. So you would compare one group to another, and then you would conclude. And here, in a nutshell, of course, you have some probability of being wrong. You have a probability that you would say, for instance, group B did better on tests, but probably we are wrong. And so you say that with X, Y, Z % of chance of being wrong. So usually we take a risk, which is called alpha. It is a type 1 error, it's called in statistics. And we say, okay, we concluded that we refuted the null hypothesis, meaning that yes, there is a difference in the cognitive performance between group A and group B. And this is due, this is another topic, but yeah, coffee does impact blah, blah, blah. And you would conclude saying things like, with an alpha risk of 5%, meaning you would have 5% chance of being wrong. So in 5%, so you conclude something knowing that you have 5% of chance that coffee doesn't impact cognitive performance. Anyway, and so in a nutshell, the more you increase, the more you have participants, the more confidence you have in your results, basically. And so the less chance of being wrong you are. Because statistical laws, so this is this thing. The alpha risk, there is a whole lot of formulas to compute them. But the alpha risk is the risk of saying the null hypothesis is invalidated while it is still true. And then you have the opposite of that. You could say, no, there is no difference, but in fact there is. And so this is the contrary of the null hypothesis. And then you have the opposite of both. One of them is called the power, for instance, is the fact that you can say, no, there is a difference, and there is actually a difference. So this is called the statistical power, if I'm not wrong here, all power. And so this power in equations is is influenced by the number of participants that you have. So the more participants you have in a statistical test, the more power you have. And so that's why when you do My point here is not to overcomplicate things, it's just to tell you whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative, this is very simple actually. Qualitative, when am I not learning anymore? Okay, drop it. Quantitative, you calculate the power you want to have for your statistical conclusions, and that's it. And you adjust your number of participants accordingly, because power is related to number of participants. Once you know the power you can afford, then you know the number of participants you would like to have. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on New Exchange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And
Yo.